Welcome to the Circus and Changing Realities 2020, a series of virtual dialogues about the future of circus. I'm your moderator and host, Jonathan Lee Iverson, and I acknowledge that I'm from the United States. Here's my audio description. I'm tall, dark, and handsome. I'm 6'4". I'm brown skinned. I'm bald, and smooth faced. That's it. So imagine a really, really nice looking man. Whatever works. Today's episode is part of a mini series called Wake Up Call for Inclusion. In previous episodes, we have talked to artists, managers, authors, historians, and psychologists about the different forms of institutional barriers and biases in the circus industry. Prize fighters often muse that it is better to simply suffer a knockout than the brutality of a full-length bout, which has proven to be far more debilitating. Such is the case with microaggressions. They don't simply devastate you in one fell swoop, they terrorize you over a long haul until one might find themselves numb to it. Yet, the consequences are all the same, particularly for those who feel they have no recourse. Small indignities add up to weighted burdens of grief, leading to a variety of consequences in one's health, mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. Now, to be clear, we understand that microaggressions can happen to almost any community, whether it be LGBTQI, women, you name it, or the disabled. Today, we're going to focus on racial microaggressions. Institutionally, the circus, for all its spectacular traits, has not always been the most welcoming bastion of humanity and tolerance it likes to portray. For many Black people and people of color, despite the soaring bodies and daring feats, perhaps merely existing without falling apart has been the greatest of all feats. The great poet Langston Hughes described it as such in his wonderful poem, Minstrel Man. Because my mouth is wide with laughter and my throat is deep with song, you do not think I suffer after I have held my pain so long. Because my mouth is wide with laughter, you do not hear my inner cry. Because my feet are gay with dancing, you do not know I die. Today's panelists are a diverse and distinguished collection of artists, academics, creatives, psychologists, and founders, and they hail from all over the world. So upon introduction, each panelist will give an audio description of themselves for our visually impaired audience, and hopefully their description of themselves will be much more eloquent than mine. First up, we have Dr. Diane J. Goodman, who has been addressing issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice for over 30 years. As a trainer, facilitator, coach, and consultant, Diane and her associates have worked with a wide range of organizations, nonprofits, businesses, community groups, schools, and universities. Using a participatory approach, she helps people increase their awareness, knowledge, and skills to foster equity and inclusion. Diane regularly presents at national and international conferences and is the author of Promoting Diversity and Social Justice, Educating People from Privileged Groups, and co-editor and contributor to Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice and other publications. Welcome, Diane Goodman.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here from outside New York City in Nyack, New York, which is Muncie Lenape land. I am a cisgender, middle-aged white woman, not as gorgeous as Jonathan, but I have black and gray curly hair and wearing a black and white shirt, and I think I said I was white. And my pronouns are she or they.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. Dr. Jamita Nicole Barlow is a community psychologist and assistant professor of writing, women's leadership, and health policy and management at George Washington University. Her writings on Black girls and women's health, intersectionality, health equity, healing, and restorative health practices in psychology and public health research appear in various publications, and she offers community-based and industry-focused workshops and training courses on these topics. Dr. Barlow holds a Master's of Public Health and a PhD in Psychology. Please welcome Dr. Jamita Nicole Barlow.
Thank you for that introduction. It's my honor and pleasure to be here. I acknowledge that I'm standing here in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. I am on the Nacotchitane people's land, which is what the Anacostia River here is named after, and they were moved to the Piscataway tribe in Maryland. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I have medium to long length, dark brown, black hair. I'm wearing brown glasses, and I think that I am beautiful, but I'm short and and very smooth brown skin, and I identify as a Black woman. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you, Doctor. Moving on to Dr. John Paul Zaccarini. He became associate professor in circus at Stockholm University of the Arts after completing his PhD thesis, Circle Analysis, and is now tenured professor of performing arts. He was co-artistic director of Company FZ and toured the solo show Throat internationally for 9 years to critical acclaim. He was a member of DV8 Physical Theater and has directed and choreographed numerous circus and theater productions in the UK, Denmark, and Sweden. He currently works with spoken word and intersectionality. Jean-Paul is currently leading a creative recovery project at Stockholm University called Future Black Space that is designed for people of color who operate within largely white fields institutions and offers them a chance through creative writing practices to reflect upon how this affects or troubles their work study. Please welcome the one and only Dr. John Paul Zaccarini.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm sitting here in Stockholm at 5 o'clock in the evening. It's terribly dark, so I have candles flickering on my face, which hides the wrinkles of this young-looking 50-year-old mixed race, queer identifying, intersectional mashup. That's what you see in my face. I have a dark curly hair and I'm wearing glasses. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Zaccarini. Majo Caceres is a circus artist, production manager, coach, graduated from the Superior School of Circus Arts, ESAC, in Brussels in 2015. She has performed as a freelance artist across Europe in physical theater, cabaret, circus, and dance. Majo co-founded the circus company Naga Collective. She is a resident performer at Cabaret Mademoiselle in Brussels and part of the original cast of the show Sombra by GOP Variety Theater. Her latest project, Kaleidoscopio, currently on standby due to the COVID-19 crisis, is a circus exploration of Latin American colonial heritage, identity, and representation from a standpoint of immigration in Europe. Please welcome the always in motion, Majo.
Hi, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I look either my age or 7, depending on the expression. I have light brown skin, dark brown hair. I'm currently wearing a bright pink sweater, red lipstick, and I identify as cisgender female, and my pronouns are she, her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Majo. Excuse the rustling over here. I had to make sure my phone was charged. Technology. Next up is Sean Lomax, who is a U.S. Navy veteran turned 3-time world champion whistler. Possessing a whistling range of 3 octaves, his talents have taken him all over the world and even garnered him numerous appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and Late Night with David Letterman. In April 2005, Sean Lomax made his debut under the big top in the lead role of the loyal whistler in Cirque du Soleil's Corteo. He went on to thrill audiences across Europe as well with Circus Finlandia. At present, he is developing online coaching courses for, of course, whistling. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the champ, the GOAT, the one and only, the greatest of all time, Sean Lomax.
You're much too kind, sir. You're much too kind. Thank you very much. My name is Sean Lomax. I'm from originally Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am in Las Vegas, Nevada. To describe myself, I look like a Disney character. I have big eyes. I have big lips. I got a big nose. I'm brown skinned, bald headed. I guess that's about it. I will go as far as to say I am a handsome guy. I'm 60 years old. I look 60. I just have fun whistling. And I'll make sure that I get you all a copy of my Christmas whistling album before we leave today. Okay. Ciao, guys.
I can't wait to have
anything
that
else?
out.
Did I miss anything?
Oh, you're wearing
I'm happy to
glasses.
be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Mr. Lomax. Thank you very much. And finally, we have the one and only Sosina Wagayehu, who is the CEO of Ethio Circus Entertainment PLC and the director of the Circus Center in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Sosina started performing as a child and later toured with the Australian circus company Circus Oz. Sosina has a degree in theater production from Swinburne University and the National Institute of Circus Arts in Melbourne. Sosina founded the Gamo Circus School in Ethiopia that provided numerous opportunities to youth talent in Ethiopia. Her amazing story is documented in the book, The Abyssinian Contortionist, Hope, Friendship, and Other Circus Acts by David Carlin, available wherever books are sold. On behalf of Circus Talk, we extend our deepest gratitude to Sosina for joining us for this discussion in the wake of the conflict that is taking place in Ethiopia. We hope the very best for you and your family and your community's safety. Please welcome the fabulous Abyssinian contortionist, Sosina Wagayehu.
Okay. Thank you so much. You've been very kind. This is very flattering. My name is Sosina Wagayehu. I like to acknowledge I am in Ethiopia, currently the only country colonized by any Western countries. It's the only country in Africa. And I have red hair with a floral shirt and brown skin. Yeah, thank you so much to be able to meet everybody here. What an incredible collection, you know. Thank you.
Wonderful, and that is our distinguished panel.
Oh, you heard me? Did you hear me? Okay, sorry.
Yes, we heard you. Thank you very much, Sosina. That is our wonderful panel, and now we will enter our discussion, which is broken up in 5 different parts. So ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, here we go. Sosina, this question is for you. During our conversation in Center Ring, you made it clear that while you are a hard person to offend, nevertheless, you still have had to reckon with the perceptions people have had of you as a Black woman and an Ethiopian circus artist. Would you care to share an example of an experience of microaggression during your career and travels in the circus?
That's a very good question. Imagine that you're from Africa, you're from Ethiopia, and you're a circus artist, and you are traveling the world like, you know, before 20 years ago. Originally, I traveled with Circus Ethiopia, and then later on with Circus Oz and other companies around the world. So I guess like people don't, they have this certain way of what they expect to see on the stage. And then, you know, when you come up from the stage, regardless of where you perform, then they will realize that they will read the program and they realize that you are from Ethiopia. And then, you know, that's when it starts, really. You know, it starts the conversation like, I can't believe that you're from Ethiopia. I say, why not? It's like, where do you learn all these skills? And they said, from Ethiopia. And so the actual fact that people see Ethiopia as a very backwards and you know, like as if like we have like a pet elephants and pet tigers at home, it's very far what they see on the stage. So for example, I meet people even on tour, in the plane. This is one of my experience that stuck with me for 2 hours. This is like 2 hours conversation. So the lady sit next to me and she said, where are you from? I said, well, I'm from Ethiopia. And she literally said to me, I'm a well-fed Ethiopian girl. So I was kind of shocked. And then how are you going with, you know, the starvation in Ethiopia? And I'm like, well, that was in 1984. So the conversation went on, and then she literally said, you have really good English. And I said, well, I studied in Australia, I have 2 degrees. And she said, wow, your immigrants are the one that was doing a great job. And then I'm just cutting it short. And then she just turned and said, well, you know, have you heard that there is a Circus Oz mob on the plane? And I'm like, you're sitting next to one. And she turned around and she just went, oh, what do you do? You know, I'm a circus artist. And she said, oh, you must be very lucky. And I'm like, well, no, I'm not lucky. I worked for it. I earned it. So this conversation went on and on until, you know, I actually taught her about Ethiopia. And I actually am a board of director for the company as well. And when I came down, you know, I told my friends and they went, oh my God, so I'm like, no, it's okay. Because I guess like the offensive parts comes, like I grew up in a country in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is, you know, people know about Ethiopia and well, we have a very long history and we know our identity and we are the only country not colonized and you have that firm strength in you. So I was up for educating people. So whatever things that comes to me, I'm literally educate people, our culture, our heritage, where we come from, people that, things that they don't know. So that's why I always say that it's very hard for people to offend me because that foundation is already made where I come from, because we have a very, very strong culture that we're very proud to talk about it day and night. So people, if they say that in 1984 or poverty or undermined you, I'm like, I'm not ready to be undermined to start with, but also I'm happy to teach them, you know, to educate them so they don't repeat the same mistake. So that's why I say that it's very hard for people to offend me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sosina. Thank you very much. Next up, I have a question for Maho. During the inaugural installment of Wake Up Call for Inclusion, you spoke of the rich diversity of the city of Brussels. Your quote, you go into the streets, you see all kinds of faces, accents, and languages, and then you go to the theater, and it's a completely different world. So would you share with us an experience of microaggression as a woman of color and artist in the midst of a world that often boasts of its openness, but clearly has not practiced inclusion and diversity?
Well, first of all, it's kind of different to separate microaggressions by racial ones from gender ones, because one thing adds to the other. And sometimes I feel that I'm addressed because I'm specifically a woman of color or a Latin American woman, because Latin American men and women are stereotyped in very different ways. So like, I think that it plays very strongly. And I think, like, first of all, the first degree of microaggression that I encounter a lot is that here in Europe, I feel, in general, not just in Brussels, but there is this notion that racism is an American problem, that it doesn't exist in Europe, that we're far, like, oh no, but in the States is bad, but no, us, not, like, no, like, first of all, you're like, where do you think they got this slavery idea? Just saying, where do you think they got it from? And then there's, like, I think usually people mean well, and they try to compliment me, and it just goes off, or they get angry because like, it's not because it's positive that a stereotype isn't narrowing and isn't a case as well. And because, like, Latinos or Mexican, we have this like, oh, that's why you're so passionate. That's why you were so into it in your number. And at some point you're like, no, I've trained for years to be a good actress. Or like, they're like, oh, but you're so sensual, hips don't lie, yada, yada. At least that is like, it's hard to, feel that as a Latin American woman specifically, you can get out of this exotization, this sort of exotic bird, that your value is to be colorful, and that your value is to be non-white. That they're like, oh, but here is great, it's rainy, and you bring colors and happiness and blah, 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 and dance and joy. And you're like, one, my job is not to entertain you, and two, I am me, and I am allowed to be shy or wear black or not dance as Latin American. So that's often not just one situation, but it happens repeatedly. And then, of course, like the classic one, which is very painful when it's with friends, for example, which is, why do you speak about race and migration so much? You're just separating everybody. And that one hurts, because it's like, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Majo. I appreciate that. And we are moving on to Dr. John Paul Zaccarini. In a review of your show, the Mixed Race Mixtape the Mixed Race Mixtape Circle Center for New Circus described the show and you as follows. Jean Paul is a dragademic, a professor who raps, a queer of color, working class hip hop drama clown queen, homo funky and street spunky. The queer circus returns from the 90s to embolden beige political performance and drop its poetic mixed race ink into a sea of circus white. I love that last line. Sea of circus white. How does one with such a rich milieu of identity, which also includes being an academic, maneuver and thrive in such a homogeneous space?
With a good deal of humor, I think, is the first strategy. Being in a very homogeneous space, mostly Northern European, mostly white Northern European, conditioned by a very male-centric kind of form of teaching and education, I decided to start performing myself in all those various identities. Before I passed, I mean, all of that you just read is packaged in light-skinned, posh accent, well-educated, privileged, social mobility, passing as straight if I want to, all of that kind of privilege I have being a man. And I realized that one way to really make the other more visible was to be that other, since I was almost the only other in that space. So I did it really because there was a moment of homophobia happening to one of my students who didn't want to report it, but just wanted to share it with me. And so I wasn't going to let the little beep get away with that. So the next day I decided to be as queer as I possibly could, as often as I could, while he was in the space. So instead of maybe doing yoga in the morning, I would Vogue. I would kind of claim the music box and just put disco on and then throw my afro around and just dance around and take the space. And the sense of humor I bring to the situation on a kind of daily level is a means of not getting exhausted by what Cecilia was calling about education, and also what Macha was saying about, I'm not there to entertain you, but if I have to educate you, I think I'm going to have fun with it. So I do tend to channel in the space that I was in, but also on the streets of Stockholm, when the Swedish Democrats were gaining votes to chuck immigrants out. I kind of channel a combination of Beyonce, Angela Davis, RuPaul, and Malcolm X into my strut, and I kind of I channel that pride and beauty that I have in all those various identities as a very positive force in the space, so that it doesn't kind of cause this notion of white fragility. So that's how I navigate it, but it does end up being exhausting. So now I'm back to being quite regular and not as extra as I was, but I hope it served a purpose.
Sir, I don't think you can ever be non-extra. Wonderful, wonderful. Sean Lomax, during our conversation on Incentering, and I hope you all don't mind me my unapologetic promoting of my show. Incentering, Sean Lomax was featured on this wonderful show, and you opened up about the various microaggressions you encountered during your career with Cirque du Soleil. You recounted a word of caution that a friend of yours gave you following one of your performances in what was then Cirque du Soleil Presents Corteo, in which you famously portrayed the lawyer Whistler, a strapping ringmaster who used whistling to communicate and direct the proceedings, quote unquote. Your friend stated that because of your strong presence, the production would not allow you to succeed. Take us into the world of a Black man contending with such an environment.
Well, it's first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm Sean, Black guy, big eyes, big lips, but it was quite alarming at the time for my friend. She was visiting. She was much older than me, mature Black woman, and she was seeing the show in San Francisco. And after the show, we had retired. We were back having dinner, and she just stated to me very clearly, "Sean, they're not going to let you continue to do that. You're a little bit too strong as a Black man coming out on stage. You come out just a little bit too strong." And my job was to keep everybody in line in the circus, and that was the direction. I was to yell. I was to, to be mean, not mean, but upset, constantly upset that everybody is playing around and not being serious and taking this situation of the death of the clown serious. What happened with me? She said basically, they're not going to permit you to continue to do this. You're coming across too, how would you say it? Just too strong. Not strong as in I'm here to break things up, but like the young lady said from Ethiopia, I knew that was what I was supposed to do, and I just went out and did it. When I was giving all these books to read, the Confessions of Mabel Stark, the Bickering, the circus that talked about the circus in the 40s and everything. When I read all of that, I was playing a character. And so when I was going out, I was playing that character, and that's what I was doing. Unfortunately, some people seen that as you're stepping a little bit too far. You're out there like you belong there. I felt that I did, but I ruffled a lot of feathers, a lot of feathers. People got really upset There were people who, of course, enjoyed it. And one of the young ladies just said that she got finished watching Cortio and enjoyed it. But there were people who also looked at it and said, no, no, no. You're not going to keep doing that. That you're sending out a message. And the message that I was sending out is, I spent many years in the United States Submarine Service, defending the United States, underwater for, 89 days at a time. And I felt, okay, I quit my job. Here I am, I'm in the circus. I got to do well. There are people watching. I'm going to do well. I'm going to do the best that I possibly can do. And it was a little bit too much. It's okay to do well, but don't do too well. And that was the type of indications. There was no volunteering for anything. There was no, we don't need you to do that. You just do what you're doing, and that's it. We have no other use for you. You have no other use in the future in this organization. You just do what we ask, and that's it. And we'll keep it at that. And I, as an individual, just could not continue on like that. And to be constantly, there's a saying, the saying goes, like tiny darts or fiery darts that are constantly being shot at you. And you have to be careful because those are the microaggressions. And just constantly, it chips away at an individual. It chips away at an individual's feeling, worth. You can't go out on stage and be a ringmaster if you're told, constantly that you're this, you're that, you're not adhering to what we like. It kind of affects you mentally when you're going out doing a good job and the audience is responding in a positive, overly positive way, and the people you're working for are telling you, yeah, okay, but you could have did it better, or it's just a constant negative. And if you stick around, you're going to do one of two things. You're going to snap, or you're going to break, or you're going to do something to yourself, or possibly, who knows. But the environment is not a positive environment to be in after a long time. It weighs very heavily on an individual. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Sean Lomax. Sure. We're going to move on to our next part of this wonderful conversation. Dr. Diane J. Goodman. Mark Twain famously opined, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. When you consider the many miles circuses travel and the diversity of its ranks within most circuses, how is it possible for a society as a circus to still find itself in the grip of racial bigotry and intolerance?
Yeah. I mean, first I want to thank the panelists for sharing their stories. And, I am just continually struck by, as you were just saying, Sean, what these things that can be perceived as little things or as compliments, as Mahu said, the toll that they take. And I think it's just so important for people who aren't on the receiving end of them to understand that. So thank you for what you all shared. And the answer of why, despite the diversity in some contexts of the circus, the simple answer is the ideology of white supremacy is deep and wide. And and we could say that about misogyny, we could say that about homophobia and all the rest of the ways that we learn their systemic inequities against groups of people. So I think on the one hand, we are all socialized in our given contexts and societies to learn things and not learn things about different groups of people, the kind of stereotypes that other panelists were just speaking about. Those are all things that are in the air that we breathe in our various societies in different ways, whether we get them from the media, from our schools, from our communities, in our global world where, you know, there's so much more interconnection. We're watching media from different countries. You know, racism is not unique to the United States, but I will certainly acknowledge that we have a big role in helping to perpetuate it. So I think the messages have historically and currently are so steeped. Certainly I can speak for the US, but I know it's not solely the US, that it takes a lot to overcome them. And so I think contact with people, I mean, what all the research shows is by getting to know real people from different groups and developing authentic relationships is a way we break down barriers, is a way we break down our biases. So it can happen and it does happen, but we need to be intentional about that. We need to be intentional about recognizing the biases we have. We need to be intentional about really learning more about different groups of people, and that can be by those actual relationships. And just coexisting isn't enough. You know, we need to actually get to know people in meaningful ways. We can educate ourselves, obviously, by reading things, by watching things, by listening to things. So I think it takes more intentionality than simply we're just going to be in some same space together.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. I think it goes back to the adage, you know, diversity is what happens to you, inclusion is what you choose. Dr. Jamita Nicole Barlow, author John Howard Griffin offered this observation during his time in the Jim Crow South, which he details in his seminal work, Black Like Me. It was a little thing, but on top of the other little things, it broke something in me. How would you detail the burden of racial microaggressions on its recipient?
Well, first, I like to say I'm glad I got a question about the Jim Crow South. I'm a proud Southerner. I am from Charlottesville, Virginia, and the South gets a bad rep, right? So I just want to say that. But this idea of microaggressions, particularly racial microaggressions, I just want to first thank all of the artists earlier for offering these examples, because I don't actually like the term microaggressions, because when you're on the receiving end, depending on the day, that can be really aggressive behavior. So I simply call it aggressive behavior, right? And when it happens in the workplace, what's happening is then it becomes a very harmful situation and you're receiving this aggressive behavior. And so when you think about detailing the racial microaggressions on someone who's the recipient of it, I'm thinking about not just the physical and mental and emotional health effects, but I'm even thinking about it in a workplace setting, right? Is that not only are you expected to do your job, you're also carrying all of these other things along with it. And so if you think about physical, I always like to talk about cortisol. It's one of my favorite hormones to talk about when we're talking about stress, because what happens when you're managing a lot of stress due to microaggressions, you're increasing cortisol in your body, and we need cortisol, but too much cortisol can cause things like hypertension, cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes. And if you look at a lot of communities of color, they actually are experiencing higher rates of these diseases. And because I'm a public health person, it also explains why they're at risk right now when we're thinking about COVID as a comorbidity. And so when we're thinking about detailing the burden of racial microaggressions, we have to understand it's a cyclical effect. That if the systems in which, as you know, Dr. Goodman mentioned, the systems in which we're all operating, these systems of oppression or of inequities, they're creating workplace situations and daily lived experiences where people are having to manage their emotions and the actual physical effects of when you have too much cortisol. It's that fight or flight hormone, right? And so if you live in constant fear or you have these situational occurrences of constant fear, that is not safe for you health-wise. It's not safe for you environment-wise. And so we see the effects on the recipient. And it takes a lot to uncover that, but it's important that we recognize that there are multiple effects in the workplace, emotions, mental, as well as physical. And a lot of it is due to stress and the fear that's called from aggressive behavior.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barlow.
Thank you, Dr.
Dr.
Barlow.
Sean looked
Sorry.
like you wanted to say amen. No, I saw you up there. You look like you was testifying. Dr. John Paul Zaccarini, as a psychoanalyst, much of your work focuses on the why of what unconsciously motivates the behavior or chosen discipline of the circus artist. Institutionally, what would you say is the unconscious motive or why maintaining the practice of racial microaggression within the circus world?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm gonna relate it back to Jamit and Diane because and I come from not a psychological perspective but a psychoanalytic perspective here to say that I think the practice of microaggression, racial microaggression, is an unconscious practice, and I mean that, but it's because what one puts into the unconscious is things that are unbearable to your kind of often heroic self-narrative of who I am. I also think about national narratives as well, like national narratives. I think what gets put into the unconscious, if I can think about Sweden, for example, is a kind of fear of loss, a fear of loss of whiteness, because Sweden, for example, at this moment needs to deal with whiteness as a concept because of the amount of non-whites within its society. And remember that, you know, Sweden is kind of up there in terms of eugenics and kind of racial purity as well. So I think as a result of that, things like there's a sort of melancholy that is happening, or there's a grieving that is not being dealt with. And I think when I call it acting out, I call it acting out. People are saying these things, these microaggressions, or full-on aggressions, but they don't realize how aggressive they're being. So they're very difficult to pinpoint in a space. And I think the carrying home of those darts that Sean was talking about, all those mosquito bites, and then dealing with that at home is a result of not being able to respond to things without having the whole upset, which is white fragility, emerging into the space. For me personally, I don't mind you being upset. I don't mind that. But what your upset does to a constructive space is what I mind. How you perhaps derail the conversation that people of color were trying to have. Suddenly the focus is on your pain because you inadvertently caused pain. And that whole inadvertent is a terrifying notion for me, because it's almost like, was colonialism inadvertent? Was slavery inadvertent? These are the echo effects of a narrative which people cannot bring to consciousness. So I think institutionally speaking, it's a microaggression that there are no books from people of color on our shelves. Is it a microaggression that there's 0.5% of melanin in the circus department over 15 years? Is that a microaggression? Is it a slip up? Is it a mishap? Or is it something that you just do not see? If we have seen the gender gap, we've managed to work that out. Is the question of people of color within this industry not relevant? That's a deep unconscious thing going on, and it needs to be kind of torn out, kicking and screaming. And the discomfort that people of color, LGBTQI, women have experienced in those circus spaces, and people of color, all of that discomfort needs to be the default discomfort of the white institution. And that's how I think we might make some change, by saying, you're just going to have to get awkward with this. It's going to get awkward, and fragility is going to keep on coming into the room, and we're going to have to deal with it, but you have to deal with it and not us. So I think unconscious repression of some pretty disgusting history, I think that's why it perpetuates itself, particularly in so-called liberal institutions.
Thank you, Dr. Zaccarini. For our performers, I have a question for each of you, and we can start with Sean, and then we can go as you all would please. So, have you challenged the racial microaggressions you encountered, or did you have reservations? If so, why? So we'll start with Mr. Lomax, and then Sosina, Maho, and of course, Dr. John Paul.
I was in a situation that I felt that it would behoove me not to get into a thing. It was always when I challenged, it became, oh, are you aggressive? Now it gets flipped back on me that I'm being aggressive, or I'm getting calm down, or the typical I'm afraid now of this, big black man. And I'm only 5'6", but I do have a pretty big chest, or whatever you want to say. But I'm a big, small guy. Does that make sense? It immediately goes into, either it gets totally joked off, or it's a well, he got the key to my room and came into my room while I was asleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, told the people at the front desk that he was me, and he came into my room, and it's and it's laughed off. It could have been a situation where if the person would have, I had a lock over my door that locks the door. It could have been a situation if the person would have come into my room and I was sleeping, I would have, defended myself, or there's somebody in my room in a situation like that. That's just one situation that I was in, that it could have been terrible because of this aggression, but not only because of the aggression, but because when I brought it to the individuals who are in charge, they laughed it off, like it was, and you can't go into anyone else, and so it's laughed off. It's a joke or whatever. If it doesn't get laughed off, or if it isn't a joke, then it becomes, oh, you're getting upset. You're getting violent. You're the angry black man. And so it's very difficult to walk that line when someone does say something to you and you try to respond. You'll wind up in the situation and not them. I'll leave it at that.
Sosina, have you challenged the racial microaggressions you encountered, and or did you have reservations? If so, why?
For example, when I work with a company like Circus Oz, it's quite an incredible company as itself. Like, even in gender-wise, they make sure they're half and half. We have 100% artistic input. That's what I love about that company. And obviously, with the colored artist or black artist, it's not much in Australia. When I was there, I was the first, bouncing juggler, female bouncing juggler, when I arrived in Australia. So even at school, when I was in the Swinburne, in the theater course, I was the only black girl. So I have all these things comes out, like questions and challenge, and obviously I'm into educating them. I literally answer them with a positive note about what they don't know. But when I was working with the company, obviously there was a person that I don't feel that I don't go along with. And I felt that it was literally racial. And I tried to work it out the first year or so, but it wasn't sitting very well. So I literally let her go, because, when you're on tour, the most important thing is who you hang out after the show or before the show. So I choose with the people that they like my culture. I choose the people. Basically, I invite the whole company to Ethiopia, to come and see my culture. And I basically get the Ethiopian restaurant to cater when we perform in Melbourne. I get them to cater twice, in a season. So the company is incredible. I mean, it's an amazing group of people. But this individual person, I didn't go along for 8 years. So, so basically, I just let it go. I feel sorry for that person. They might have some baggage that they have to deal themselves. They have to deal themselves. It's all to do with your upbringing. Again, I think I always say that I am so lucky to be born in Africa. I'm really lucky person to be born in Ethiopia, where there is so much culture and so much going on, that people don't take it as a granted. And I feel very sorry for people that were born on those situations. You know what I mean? Like, who are born in a place where there is racial conditions. Because when we were born in Ethiopia, what we know is we are the only country that not colonized by any Western culture. So what we have is a thousands of years culture. So that itself actually build you up in a certain way. It won't be the same for my kids. You know what I mean? So that's why I actually brought my family to Ethiopia, my young children to Ethiopia, so they can talk about who they are. And if they face these kind of things, I hope they will deal the same way I do, or even better. So this person that I just left for 8 years is just because I don't lose anything. I mean, that person doesn't exist for me anymore, and that's fine. And I still perform great, and I still love the company. The most important thing is after I perform, all my mates that I hang out with and travel out and see more places with them. So yeah, that's why. Because confronting, well, you try to make it work. If it doesn't work, I mean, like, that person must be sad. I mean, that only comes from that person. And you just have to, I just have to let it go, really. Didn't bother me.
I appreciate it, Selsina. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Maho, the question
the
again
question
was,
again
I'm sorry,
was-
I'm sorry, is there feedback?
Is there feedback?
I hate feedback,
I
I'm
hate
sorry.
feedback. I'm sorry.
Can you mute your
Can you mute
mic?
your mic?
Let me mute my,
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, there you
Okay.
go.
Wait. Okay. My apologies. Usually I like my voice. But Maho, same question to you. Have you challenged the racial microaggressions you encountered, or did you have reservations? If so, why? Or rather, in your case, the microaggressions you encountered, because you made it clear there is an interesting intersectionality with you being a woman and a woman of color. So were you able to challenge those, or were there reservations for you?
So I mostly hadn't until now, which is also in part I want to own responsibility for not doing that, because I've been most of my 20s in a sort of huge urge to assimilate and to be accepted and to take in whatever kind of violence there, like, for a chance to belong to a dominant group, to have an impression of equality, because it's never true equality if you have to censor half of yourself to get in there. But I actively try to assimilate. I actively try to downplay the aspects of myself and my baggage and my culture that I felt were making people read me as other. So first of all, I absolutely own that. I understand why, and in a way, I feel that throughout my process of networking and establishing myself as a professional, I kind of needed that to a certain point. I did need to, because you need to get to a certain point to be able to shake things up, to be able to stand up for yourself, to be able to be like, okay, I'm gonna survive, I'm gonna cocoon over here, I'm gonna hibernate until I'm strong enough, mature enough, or surrounded by the right people and have the right tools to carry on. I think I did the best I could with the resources I had in my 20s, which were not that many. More and more, I challenge it because by now I'm over 30. I know myself. I have a network of people who are people of color and queer and women and feminist. And I know that if somebody gets upset at me, I have a safety net to fall back on, which is very, very important. Sometimes I don't, and sometimes I didn't, because if you're the only person of your kind in a setting, you're the troublemaker immediately. You're the troublemaker because you're the only one who sees a problem, and you're like, and it's like, I think I'm very clever for making this joke, maybe I'm not, but like, it's like if you're colorblind, if for you blue and purple are the same color, you're like, I see a problem and nobody else sees it. Because people might not have until very recently educated themselves to the point where they could understand this. I really believe that many people in circus until like maybe this year with Black Lives Matter never thought of themselves as white. They thought of themselves as people. Like white as a construction. Why do we talk race and we don't talk white? We immediately talk like Black, Asian, Latino, blah, blah, blah. And more and more, like John Paul says, I go back to humor. I laugh about it when people are like, oh, you're Mexican, I have a Peruvian friend. You're like, cool, Peru is another country and it's really far away. Or like this sort of myth of the monolithic Latino culture. You're like, okay, like this. There's as many kilometers between northern Mexico and southern Argentina as there are between northern Norway and Madagascar. So it's like, it's a huge distance. It's 20, like a bunch of countries, different stories, different cultures. No, we're not a monolith, and cool, you have a Peruvian friend, I probably don't know them. So more and more making jokes about it to kind of bring it on in a non-confrontational way, because it's, as a friend says, like sometimes you need to, some people are not worth the effort, as Susina says. Some people won't get it, some people won't make the effort, and you're like, well, too bad for you. But if you feel that somebody might make the effort, then you kind of make the effort, like, okay, it's emotional labor, it's exhausting, and people are entitled to not want to do that. If you have the energy, you can be like, okay, I'm gonna try to reach out to you and explain you this in words and terms at a pace you will be able to understand, because I feel that you're making the effort and you're literally trying to understand it. But so it depends on the situation. More and more I do. More and more I do.
Thank you very much for that perspective. John Paul, same question to you. Have you challenged racial microaggressions you encountered, or did you have reservations? If so, why?
I can say why I might have reservations in not challenging it. I think it's because of what that might produce in the space and whether challenging that is good for the space or bad for the space. Not necessarily for me personally. I'm in a state of adrenaline when it happens to me, because I have to think very quickly how I'm going to respond, whether I'm going to respond, and do I have something in my pocket to respond to that will end this situation in a fruitful manner, both pedagogically, and I can go home and have done with it and dealt with it, and not take it home and itch and do that emotional labor over this, was that a thing, was that not a thing? I've got to be careful of my the affect that arises instantly. What is that? And if it's rage, then I need to cut the hell back and say, I'll deal with this another time. But actually, in response to Machel, I do take that home with me and I take it to the studio. And I imagine I've got my Black creatives. I've got Jordan and Peele, for example, they're definitely on the team. I've got my Black comedy creatives. Right, how is this a sketch? Because I want to leave that with a sense of dignity and of owning that situation, because that person has decided to put me in a narrative with their story. And hell no, I'll be playing my own narrative, thank you very much. And I want to leave that situation with dignity, whether or not I manage to educate them or not. But how do I diffuse at least that situation? If, you know, as we're saying, some people, they're not going to get it. But how can you at least leave that situation with your head held high, knowing that at home, you're not going to do the labor that person probably hardly ever does? So again, same with Machel and Susina, it depends on the situation.
Thank you very much. That was powerful. Thank you, John. Dr. Jamita Nicole Barlow, when we look at it, Black people, people of color, and women often find themselves internalizing these aggressions as a means of not wanting to endanger their employment or worse. How can the recipient of racial aggressions manage their health, spirit, mind, body, etc., assuming there's no adequate recourse for redress?
I think that's a great question, but I actually think Sean, Sosina, Maho, and Jean-Paul answered it, and I'll kind of break that down. So first, before I do that, I just want to say that when we think about identity development, all of us, regardless of the identity, we might be on different ranges of that. Some of us are very aware of our identity. Some of us are just coming into that specific identity. So that being said, when you go into a job, particularly as a young person, right, you might be trying to do a really great job and might not have the confidence to speak up and do what you need to do. And that's okay. That's where you are. But maybe later in life, you have no problem doing that. And so that's just a very small example. But when I was hearing the artists talk about their experiences, I just kept thinking, well, there's your answer, right? So the first thing I say is decide whether or not you choose to even engage. Right? You see something happening, it is your choice whether or not to engage. There are some battles that are worth fighting and there's some that aren't. And you have to choose which one makes the most sense for you and your situation. The other thing I would do is make sure that you're safe, right? If you feel that you're not safe, document that instance of, are you, what are things that are happening? How can I make this experience, at least my response to it, as safe as possible? The other thing is I really encourage people to keep an anger journal or some type. I use writing as healing in my interventions in communities. So keep an anger journal. There are some things that maybe, if you said it, yeah, you might lose your job, right? So keep an anger journal. That's where it all goes. I love that you mentioned Key and Peele, Jean-Paul. So I imagine like that guy, when I remember they did Obama, when they had like Obama, what he really wanted to say. So maybe that's your anger journal and you include that there and all the things that you wanted to say, because maybe you're not in a position, you're that only one, as Maho mentioned. And so I would really encourage you to also build a community, right? Because I often talk about self-care, but we also need to talk about community care. Right. And so we know through, and I love like self-care in the Black feminist tradition, which really in identity politics was really about finding people who had similar experiences as you and building community so you could then do the work that needs to get done to break down those inequities based on that identity. And so when I think about that, when you're building community with people who are experiencing what you're experiencing, then you can do that. I love Sosina's example of introducing people to her culture, and she chose to do that. But you might be in a situation that you might choose not to do that. The other thing I'd like to mention is that I think it was Sean's example, is that there are going to be times that people feel like they're making a joke at your expense. And I find that it's important to create boundaries, but also to practice, this is what I heard. And so when I experience or when I see people experiencing aggressive behavior, I tell people to name it and repeat it back. And so when it happens, I'll say, so what you're saying is you thought imitating someone and walking into their bedroom in the middle of the night was going to be funny, right? And just let people sit with that for a while. Right. And so when you do those type of things, you're asking people to do that work of trying to figure out what actually happened and this was wrong. Sometimes, most people will get it. And those that don't, you might not reach in that time, and you're just going to have to be able to accept that. And so those are just a bunch of examples of things that you can do when, you're trying to manage your health, practice self-care, whatever that looks like for you. If it's gardening, if it's yoga, meditation, if it's walking, if it's laughing. I watch a lot of YouTube laughter comedy videos. If that's it for you, then that. But I also don't like how self-care has been taken and just kind of commodified and taken away from at least the way in which I learned it in the Black feminist tradition. And so I find ways to create community care. Right? What does that look like in your community? Maybe it's potlucks however, virtual potlucks, I guess. Whatever it is that you can do to build community care, those are really good options for you. And then the last thing I'll say is boundaries. find ways to create boundaries. And I've seen that in clients where, you know, if it's okay, you can turn your video off. They don't need to see you if you're doing something that's online. Find ways to create boundaries. One way is maybe you get a lot of emails, and I say, I tell people that you acknowledge the email, go take a walk for about 20 minutes, and then come back and address the email, right? Make sure that you're in a space to respond and to respond as professionally as you can.
Thank you so
If I
much,
could-
Doctor.
If I could,
Sure.
one of the things that I found myself doing, and the analogy that I used was, I changed my phone number. Everybody is trying to push the button, you know, to get you to respond. That is what I found in most of the cases. It was, there would be something said, and then I would have to make some type of response to it. And what I learned to do was to change my number and not let any of the things that were being said affect me. Because as more and more people realize, oh, he gets upset if you say this, or he gets upset as you say that, you get a deluge of that on a daily basis from more people. You are, like I said, it's like three darts being, you know, shot at you. And you eventually, by the end of the day or the end of a period, you are under assault, and you have to figure out a way to be able to do what you have to do, your job, and take care of these situations, but not take care of them because you don't want to get involved at all in the conversation. So basically, you just ignore it. You learn to ignore it, but that only works for a limited amount of time. Being a human being, it affects you. And the more you ignore it, the more aggressive it gets. And you keep trying to change your number. I'm sorry, that number's not working anymore. And and they're like, okay, well, we're going to dial something else. And so it's not a battle, but it's something you must be aware of. And it takes its toll. Believe me, it takes its toll. Okay, I'm out. I'm done.
Thank you, Sean. Dr. Goodman, what would you say are the responsibilities of an ally?
Yeah, I think we have many responsibilities and possibilities as allies. As a number of people spoke about, and Sosina, you particularly talked about, you know, educating people. And I think if people want to do that, that's great. But I think, Maho, you talked about the emotional toll of that. And so I think as allies, how do we educate ourselves and each other? So it's not putting that burden and expectation on people of color, in this case, we're talking about race, to be educating us. So the first step is, because I think if we don't see that we're committing microaggressions, if we can't notice that they're happening, then we can't step up in any kind of way. So I think the first thing is, how do we educate ourselves? I do a lot of work with other white people around racism and how to be anti-racist. So I think that's the first step as allies, is how do we get smarter and more conscious in the first place. Some of that can be, we can speak up. And I don't say this as sort of saving people of color. But, you know, if something is happening and we hear it, we see it, I can be the one to say, you know, I'm really uncomfortable with what you just said, or I'm not sure what you meant by that when you said X, Y, or Z. So there are ways it doesn't necessarily have to be on the person who's experiencing it. I find that offensive when I hear racial microaggressions or things that I think are racially offensive. So I can also speak up in settings. And again, being mindful that this is not about rescuing or speaking over or saving people of color, but it is also recognizing that I have a responsibility to the space as well. We can offer some personal support. So if something does happen, to go up to someone afterwards and say, I saw that happened, you know, how are you? And is there something that I could do that you would find helpful? So again, it's allowing someone else to decide what they would like, but offering that I am willing to also step in some way. We can look at institutional policies and practices, and I know we may talk about this more later, but you know, as we're looking at talking about the larger environment, when things are being decided about who's getting hired, who's getting different job responsibilities, the policies that, you know, the circus or the workplace has. How am I thinking about that from a racial equity lens? So I'm really trying to make sure that we're creating an environment that will be equitable and inclusive to everybody. And one other thing that I say to white folks is, you know, how do we be the person that people feel like they can say something to? What you were saying, John Paul, about the whole white fragility, right? Like we know that happens, it creates that upset, it shifts the environment. And so for a lot of people, and myself included, we do and say things unintentionally. It doesn't eradicate the impact, right? We have to pay attention to the impact, but people are saying things either to be complimentary or because they don't know. And so when people do give us feedback, when people of color do decide it is worth the effort in this moment, how do I just hear that, right? Say thank you, change my behavior. So I become the person that people can say things to and not worry about the risk involved or the retaliation or the white fragility that's going to happen. So I think those are just some of the ways that people can show up as allies.
Yes, Maho.
Yeah, I think something that I think about a lot is about like the whole intersectionality aspect of it. Of, for example, because just saying, like, for example, I remember very much when I did a microaggression towards a white friend, but who is a very unstraight passing lesbian. She's gay, she looks gay, she has been bullied for being gay. I might be queer, I am straight passing, so I don't know that. And I'm once joking with her, also because at the time I didn't understand the weight that word had. I used the word dyke joking with her. And it was extremely hurtful to her, who is a native English speaker and who had been bullied under that word. And for me, I didn't understand. So for me, thinking about this history in particular, because he's a very dear friend, helped me be more patient and more compassionate towards people, because like I hurt her. I didn't mean to, I didn't know any better. I didn't have any bad intentions to like bridge that gap, because I also can see how when we are in only one case of minority, for example, gay men can be extremely misogynistic or racist. There's enormous racism in the LGBTQ plus community. There is homophobia within the communities of color, etc., etc. So I don't know, to me, it's like try to keep an environment of you mess up, I mess up, we take turns at it, we get better together, no one is good or bad, because we're kind of all very easily fall into the good or bad dichotomies. And someone has to be good, someone has to be bad. And that, I don't think it helps. Also, sometimes there's no point. Sometimes the conversation doesn't go anywhere. And sometimes you're legitimately exhausted to carry on with emotional labor. But this has helped. And I managed to keep friendships in this kind of situation because that kindness existed, for what it's worth.
Thank you for that. Sosina, you look like you wanted to say something.
Thank you. It's such an interesting conversation because you know, you just choose who you hang out with. Like I'm in the same company running around, you know, like all over the world. So this one person, even if like I don't feel good with that person, I have all the other love and care in the company. So I have my safety net around me, you know, to feel much better about myself and what I do. That's why I stick with my job, because I love the company so much. And I don't want, you know, I don't want that person, one person to affect me. So that also helped me to choose who I want to hang out with. And those people that I took to Ethiopia, 20 years later, they still talk about that culture and me. They promote in, you know, widely what Ethiopia means. They promote, you know, even what I do these days. I moved back to Ethiopia seven years ago. All my mates, you know, all my extended family, as I call, these are those people that I hold, you know, the rest of my life, because they know about me, they know about my culture, they know about what I do. They know when I talk, they understand what I mean. Even sometimes, you know, like there's a cultural differences, and they help me all the way with Australian slang. Or if I said, "Oh, are you pregnant?" and I didn't know that saying "you're pregnant" is offensive, because in Africa it doesn't mean anything. "Oh, no, I'm not pregnant, I'm just fat," or something. But in the West, it's not like that. So this is like a very, very simple things that my support group taught me. No, you don't say this, you say this. That kind of help and support around you actually gives you such a foundation. When those kind of things happen to you, they're so little, they become very small, and you don't really care, and they don't affect you widely.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Awesome. Dr. Zaccarini, did you want to follow up with that? Yes.
Sorry. If you don't mind, I just think it's interesting how treacherous the position of an ally is, especially after the event of performative allyship, which on social media comes like a white noise. People are trying to show their support, but in just posting a thing up and never having spoken to you about your problems with racism before suddenly seems galling. And again, a labor to have to be on social media and see that. But just a quick ironic kind of anecdote. A very, very good friend of mine was explaining to me what he'd learned on a podcast about generational trauma and DNA and kind of embodied trauma. And then he listed all the things associated with that. And then he listed the whole thing, from the shackles and the chains and the rape and the beating. And I was sat in the car opposite him, and I was thinking, okay, you're just saying to me you're trying to be an ally here because you understand that there is a generational trauma that is embodied in me to do with this history. And yet you reel out these names, which for you are abstract historical concepts, but for me are to do with my family. And it was a really interesting moment, because it's like, okay, I hope he shuts up soon, because I'm going to kind of burst. The whole family's in the car. I'm not going to burst at the wrong moment. And I had to wait till the next morning to say, is this a person who's going to hear this? And I decided he had to be a person. Like, he's in my life. He has to hear this. No matter if it takes me a few days to go, how am I going to say that was so clunky of you and so ironic, in a fact that you actually didn't understand what you were talking about, the implications of what you had learned. So yeah, just to offer that up, as it's tricky, I think, and awkward.
I do have a question for you, Dr. Zaccarini. With regards to the work that you are doing at present, how vital is it for those who are traditionally othered to carve out their own exclusive space, sans the institution and or the quote unquote white gaze?
I think I'll tap on what Jameta said about care and community, and that if there are very few of you in an institution or a field who feel othered, it could well be that you don't think it's important to connect up. But I think it is important to connect up and have an exclusive space wherein you can have the conversation you need to have without either the fragility or the shame or the guilt coming into it, without your conversation being stopped by either education, having to educate other people in the room, or dealing with these upsets. The fact that when we perhaps want to get together and talk about the impacts of colonialism or racism, we have a very different embodied reaction to it than other folk, and we want to have that embodied reaction so we can learn and progress. So I think if there is a system, a structure which is not giving the same provision to its non-white students as it's giving to its white students, then there needs to be an exclusive space. Because those non-white students, for example, who are developing their project and their artistry, they're having to do that within a white context, and they're having to perform constantly for the white gaze and the white field. And that is not a full expression of their humanity as artists. And that's not a full expression of the potential for art to bring these questions forward. So I think there is, but I think it can happen underneath the university, to the side of the university or the institution. But whatever gaze it is that is preventing you from properly accessing your full potential, like the person next to you, whatever it is, you need to remove that from a space and make a space where that thing is not in it. That's just fair, I think. No matter how much it scares institutions, and no matter how much they think we're being radical, we're not being radical. Well, unless Jamita, self-care is radical and looking after yourself. No, it's literally about recovery and discovering ourselves as artists within a space where we're not being judged or projected upon or having to perform for a white gaze whom we do not want to upset.
Thank you, John Paul. Finally, this question goes to Dr. Diane J. Goodman and Dr. Jamita Nicole Barlow, respectively. What must be done from an institutional level to enact authentic engagement and change? And also, what are the benefits of such actions for the institution itself?
Do you want me? I can go, or did you want to go, Diane? Okay. Well, I think a lot of what's been said, a lot of what John Paul just said, right, at the institutional level, when I think about how to enact authentic engagement and change and the benefits of that, I think about what does an institution want? Often an institution wants innovation. They want to be on the cutting edge. And if you're not bringing in all of the diverse representation in society, then you're missing out. There's so many missed opportunities. And so the benefits of that is that if you have everyone at the table, all of those different perspectives, different ways of knowing, then the benefit is going to be that you're going to be innovative. You're going to think about things differently. You're going to be inclusive. If you're systematically really trying to do that. Now, how do you do that? Well, that means engaging in authentic relationships with different groups of people. And so I think those two things, engaging in authentic relationships, as well as recognizing the benefit in terms of innovation and being on the cutting edge, I think those are approaches that you can take.
Yeah, I would certainly echo that. And again, I think it takes intentionality on an institutional level. So, institutions, workplaces need to be intentional about creating space for people to learn about what microaggressions are, other kinds of bias are, how to have conversations with each other, to create this space to have those kind of authentic conversations and build those relationships. So I think there's an institutional responsibility to creating that, not just leaving it on individuals to be finding the spaces to do that. And again, as I said before, really looking at institutional policies and practices that also impact the culture. So, what kind of benefits do people have and who are included in that? I think about Sean, about, you were a little too strong, as you said. So, again, thinking about what gets valued in terms of who's getting hired, who's getting, opportunities, throughout the circus or whatever environment it is. So I really think it's looking at policies and practices as well. And there's so much research now that shows that organizations of all kinds that are diverse, that really utilize that diversity and create environments where people are treated equitably, are highly successful on numbers of measures. So no matter what angle you want to look at it, this serves the individuals in the organization, and it serves the organization, no matter what organization it is, essentially.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goodman and Dr. Barlow. And thank you to all of our wonderful panelists. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, for tuning in and joining us for this wonderful conversation. Please learn much more about our fantastic panel here in the description below. Circus and Changing Realities is Circus Talk's response to the industry crisis around the world precipitated by the pandemic. Circus Talk is an inclusive, independent, online network for the international circus industry. Circus Talk's mission is to create a level playing field for this industry and democratize access to information. Visit our news page to follow our ongoing panel series. If you haven't subscribed yet, Circus Talk invites you all to do so today at circustalk.com. Take advantage of the 60% COVID relief discount on the yearly Pro membership. Once again, I've been your host, Jonathan Lee Iverson, and as always, keep the circus alive inside you.